All right, guys, just want to welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be reacting to the 2026 NFL schedule being released. We're going to look at some of the primetime holiday games that the NFL has slated for us this year, talk about the international contests, look at some of the toughest stretches and see what teams got shafted and which ones didn't. And then we'll cap things off with some of our favorite games for the year. Getting things started, though, Nick, the Thanksgiving and Christmas games are massive for the NFL because this is typically where they're going to bring in the strongest viewership outside of playoff games. And so these selections are very important. And sometimes the NFL can overplay their hand and potentially pick teams that end up with a poor record, and the matchups can be bad. Obviously, you cannot predict injuries by any means, but sometimes these games fail to deliver compared to when they're scheduled. Obviously, some of those factors cannot be determined, but the best way to avoid that is select name brands. And I thought they did a great job here of avoiding teams like the Saints, the Dolphins that we've seen in the past, and teams of that nature. During Thanksgiving week, Nick, we have a lot of people who like to complain about more football. There's nothing wrong with the Thanksgiving Eve game at all. I think both teams, obviously, when it comes to their schedule, it's a little unorthodox. But for the Packers and the Rams, this is going to be a great contest. Usually on Thanksgiving Eve, Nick, people don't work the next day, so they're up at night. They stay up a little bit later than they typically would, and why would they not want to see a great football game? So that one going down in LA, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Netflix. It's going to be a great contest. So I'm happy with that. I think the NFL adding that in there makes a ton of sense. And if anyone's complaining, well, don't watch, I guess. The next day on Thanksgiving, though, Nick, traditionally the Lions are going to host somebody at that 1 p.m. slot, and this year it's going to be the Bears and Caleb Williams. A couple years ago, they had this game. It ended up being a thrilling finish. Of course, it ended up costing the head coach of the Bears his job, right? So there was a lot of implications from it as well. The Dallas Cowboys, their mid-afternoon slate. Love when the Eagles come to Dallas because this is always a tough trap game for them, one that they typically lose as well, Nick. So the Eagles are going to be looking to bounce back and have a much better season. This is going to be the middle of the year, week 12, and it's going to have a lot of implications for that division as well. And then who gets tired of a Kansas City Buffalo matchup going down in that new stadium in Orchard Park? To cap things off on Thanksgiving night, another very important game in the Bills. They want to stay hot against Kansas City while the Chiefs themselves are trying to also bounce back and get back to the playoffs. So, Nick, from an implication standpoint, I love these matchups, and I think the entertainment value is also going to be delivered as well.
Yeah, I think the Thanksgiving week slate is pretty solid. Beginning with that Wednesday night game, again, people can complain, but I think more football is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that Thanksgiving week anyway on that Sunday, you're not really too interested because Thursday they take away a lot of games already. So it's kind of just a week where that's going to be a holiday week. There's a lot of stuff going on. You got great college football that weekend as well, and then the Black Friday game as well, which that game, we're not as excited about, you and I personally, but it's still an interesting game for some folks. I think Denver's a fun team to watch. So getting a game on Wednesday, I don't think destroys a lot of things for the younger viewers. I know it's probably a night that you go out drinking with your friends before Thanksgiving, and normally, you watch college basketball when you go to your Thanksgiving Eve bar events. This will be fun to watch some football at one of those events this year. I'm very much looking forward to doing that with some of my friends. I think it'll be a really good matchup. The Rams Packers. I think the Packers will have a pretty strong year and will improve their fortunes. I think they'll play some good football. And the Rams were one of the best teams in the league last year, so there's no doubting they'll be one of those best teams again this year. Thanksgiving Day slate, Thanksgiving is a huge day for the NFL. Their viewership last year was some of the highest ever for regular season viewership. They had, CBS and Fox had incredible numbers on their games. NBC lagged a little bit behind, but the top two networks had phenomenal viewership on their games. And I think it starts with that game at 1 o'clock on CBS between the Bears and the Lions. A very exciting matchup. Obviously, you alluded to last time that the Lions game was on CBS was that game that ended up getting the head coach fired for the Bears, a complete meltdown where they didn't really use a timeout. It was a complete disaster, but what a fun game it was to watch. And the Lions had a pretty big lead in that game and nearly blew it, so that was a pretty interesting contest. I think the Lions will bounce back this year. The Bears, I'm a little bit iffy on because they had some really close games last year, but Caleb Williams is incredibly fun to watch. First matchup on Thanksgiving for the Eagles and Cowboys since 2014. Feels crazy that it's been 12 years, but it's nice to get that rivalry on and that mid-afternoon slate. I think this is a really solid game here, and it's good to see it after more than a decade plus. And then Chiefs Bills. It seems like NBC gambled a little bit here, and they kind of really forced getting this matchup, and they gave up some really solid matchups on Sunday Night Football this year to get this sort of prime marquee matchup on Thanksgiving. And I think it makes sense for them to do so, but they gave up some better games because the Sunday night slate this year seems a little bit weaker than previous years. Still some great matchups there. And this will be a fun one. The new stadium looks incredibly gorgeous. We'll talk about the new stadium a little bit later as well in this episode, and that's certainly going to be a big part of it for them in Buffalo. That's an incredibly loyal fan base that will show out on Thanksgiving. I bet you it's going to be cold. It's probably going to be snowing. It's going to be a freezing classic between two of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, if not the two best quarterbacks in the NFL, assuming Mahomes is fully healthy and firing on all cylinders. I expect the Chiefs to bounce back, really strongly this year. I think that was just more of a one-off last year. I think they still have a lot left in some of their aging veterans, and I think it's going to fall apart sooner rather than later. I think Chris Jones, Kelsey, some of those other guys are definitely in that older stage where they're going to start to run out of some of that magic. But I think last year was a bit of an outlier. They'll have probably 3, 4 more strong years. And I think this will be one of those years where they get back into contention and competing for the AFC. So that could be a huge matchup with top, playoff seeding implications, certainly, bye implications, things like that in that matchup. And it's going to be a really fun watch on Thanksgiving night. Should be a great way to cap off what is a really strong, 4 matchups between Thanksgiving Eve and Thanksgiving.
And you move to the Christmas slate. The NFL's going to be very thrilled with how dates aligned this year. Christmas Eve being on a Thursday and then a Friday being right after that for Christmas. So it does not really alter teams' plans too much, right? So I think that's great. It's going to be fun to watch as we have 4 games here. The NBA has owned Christmas Day for a long time with declining viewership. The NFL's like, we're going to swoop in, right? So they have 3 games lined up here, largely some of the same teams we already discussed. The Packers going on the road to play the Bears to kick things off. Middle of the day, it's going to be Buffalo and Denver, rematch of that thrilling playoff game just a couple of months ago. And then the Rams, Seahawks, massive game last year. I mean, these guys were cutting hairs in terms of how many mistakes could be made if one team wanted to win. And they were just thrilling contests. And these are the 2 best teams in the NFL. Being able to catch them on a holiday, Nick, is amazing to me. The weather's going to be cold. It's going to be just a fun time overall, maybe for the fans and us as, for the fans that's going to be there and us as viewers as well. Christmas Eve, you have the Texans and the Eagles, and hopefully by almost the end of the year, these 2 teams are completely different than what we saw last year, which was 2 pretty lackluster offenses, Nick. And if they don't improve in those regards, this could end up being a disappointing game on that Thursday night before Santa hits your door.
Yeah, this is a pretty strong slate. And the NBA had a pretty weak Christmas last year, and I think the NBA has still a space on Christmas, but the NFL kind of eroding on that makes a lot of sense. And that period between December 23rd and January 3rd is kind of what I call no man's land. A lot of us, don't really go to work a lot. There's the holidays. You have obviously Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. You have your other holidays around that period, plus New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, as well as a ton of college football, all the bowl games. And it's kind of just a period where people don't really work a whole lot. They take a lot of personal days, and there's a lot of room for entertainment. And sort of with the way that college football is going, there's some dominant potentially opportunities for the NFL to step up and put some strong games to kind of get some people's attention here. I think the Christmas Eve game is really solid for that Thursday night. I think that's a really good game. I think the Texans offense will take a step forward this year, and that will be a really fun team to watch. I'm excited to see what that matchup looks like. And then the Christmas Day games are all really strong, I think. Obviously, the one at the bottom there in the prime time, Rams Seahawks, is kind of your big one that you circle and say that's going to be the marquee matchup. Last year they played on a Thursday night late in the season. I think it was week 16, and that was one of the best games of all time in terms of regular season games. An incredible contest. Kind of reminded me, certainly one of the best prime time regular season games of all time. Certainly reminded me of that Rams Chiefs contest from about 7, 8 years ago on that Monday night. That was an incredible contest back and forth. I think that certainly benefits Seattle being in Pacific Northwest during that Christmas period. Will be a little bit colder, probably a little bit windier. It'll be tougher for the Rams, but that should still be an incredible battle across the board. And I think the other 2 games are very interesting. The Packers and Bears played 3 phenomenal games last year where they went back and forth. The Bears had a great comeback in 2 of those games. They had a great performance in that playoff game. And like I said, I'm pretty high on the Packers this year in terms of bouncing back and having a lot of impact in the NFC playoff race. And then obviously anytime you get Josh Allen and Bo Nix, who had a phenomenal playoff game against each other last year, battling out in the mid-afternoon. We saw the Broncos last year play a pretty good game on Christmas against the Chiefs. So the Chiefs, they were down to their 3rd string quarterback, and they still were fighting in that contest. So a really strong Christmas slate, and this is a great holiday slate overall. Even that Black Friday game we didn't talk a ton about between the Steelers and Broncos, just because I think the Steelers will not be very good this year. So it kind of erodes some of my interest in that contest. Still could be really solid, and overall could round out what is a phenomenal slate of 9 games here over the holiday period.
I move to the 9 international games that the NFL has released for this upcoming season. The international series, of course, is a great way to really broaden the sport and more eyes on football, Nick. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and it allows us to really grow. Getting things started in week 1, Melbourne, Australia. This is the first time they've had a game out there. I think they've had a couple of college games in the past. Many years ago, I think Jared Goff was out there. No, I think it was Davis Webb actually, but nonetheless, it's going to be 10:30 a.m. Nick in Melbourne when it's going to be 8:30 Eastern time for kickoff for that game. So very interesting. That's going to really affect the locals. But I definitely like how they tailored it around our market, so it doesn't affect us too much. We don't have to miss a great divisional showdown going down in week one. Now, I do want to get your thoughts here in a minute on games like this being held internationally because the Jaguars and Texans, also a divisional game being played overseas. The Jaguars do have two games out there, Nick, as the home team. The NFL basically said when they open up their new stadium in a couple of years, we'll give you an extra home game to repay you for that. So that's a little interesting notion going on there. Some of the other matchups not all that bad, right? In Rio, you got the Ravens and the Cowboys. Very intriguing matchup. I know that field, I think last year, Nick, was atrocious, and a lot of the players did not like it. So that's something the NFL is going to have to clean up. And then on the backside here, you have them going to Paris, Madrid, Munich, and Mexico City. These are all dream vacation destinations for the most part, Nick. So I think these are going to be really cool for these fans to see these teams. I know the travel can be grueling. Middle of the season's not always ideal for maybe the players, but at the end of the day, this does help put more money in the pockets of said league and those players. So I like these. I like waking up and being able to catch some football, Nick, before Sunday gets going. While you're building your fantasy lineups, you can catch some of these games. You can throw some money on them as well if you're that addicted that you need the bet in the morning. But overall, what is your thoughts on the cities in matchups they've selected?
Yeah, I've never really been too upset with the international series. Nine's probably a little bit too much, but I think it still is a net positive for the sport, and I like what they're doing with a lot of these games. And I think I would prefer if they stayed away from division matchups. I think that kind of is a bit. I think I'd rather have division matchups be in the home stadium. Seems like a little unbalanced for one team to play their home game in the division internationally. Kind of seems a little unbalanced. I don't love that. The NFL's been trying to get to the Far East as much as possible. I know Australia is not exactly the Far East. That's more of Asia, but you know what I mean, the eastern part of the world there, and trying to get out there and play games. I know they've wanted to play games in China, but they haven't been able to quite figure it out. So they take the plunge and go to Australia. I think both teams have a decent fan base out there. I think the Niners actually have a pretty good fan base. I think the Rams do as well. I'm not entirely sure on that. I've not been to Australia, but from what I understand, that's why. And that obviously leads to some funky things with the fact that the real kickoff, the first game will be on Wednesday this year, September 9th, which at the time of recording this is 117 days away. So that Thursday game is now cycling a little bit. I like that it's at a prime time in America. I appreciate that they did that, and I appreciate the Australians taking one for the team and having their game early in the morning there to kind of work this out. I think the Madrid one's very interesting between the Falcons and the Bengals. Joe Burrow's publicly stated in the past he wanted to play international games. He was disappointed last year they did not get an international game. He's kind of made it a public comment in the past that he wanted to play overseas, so he gets rewarded with a trip to Spain. He was very happy about that, and the Falcons could be a very interesting team. Obviously, the Jaguars, Sadiq Khan, who owns them, owns Fulham FC in the Premier League in England. He's made a bid for Wembley in the past. He's very connected overseas, which is why the Jaguars play in London all the time. They got back-to-back games. The one at Wembley, I think, is pretty interesting against the Texans. I think the one against the Eagles is also interesting as well. I like that setup for the Jaguars playing in two separate stadiums in the greater London area. And then the final game at the Allianz Arena, which is FC Bayern Munich's home in Munich. I think that's a very interesting game. Week 10, the Patriots obviously were in the Super Bowl last year. The Lions, I'm expecting a bounce back year. That could be a really intriguing matchup. That one's certainly worth waking up at 9 o'clock in the morning for. Overall, I like this slate of games. Some interesting matchups here.
And we're going to go ahead and move to some teams that have pretty tough stretches in this year's schedule release. Getting things started with the LA Rams, weeks 12 to 18. I mean, this is just brutal, right? You have that aforementioned Thanksgiving Eve game at home against Green Bay. The Chiefs are going to arrive next week on a Thursday night. So a lot of publicity overall. That's also going to include Seattle twice down the stretch, including that Christmas Day game. So they're going to get plenty of love in terms of national television. But Nick, there's no slouches here. Even the game at Tampa Bay is not going to be easy. Very tough conference they play in the NFC. And there's nothing you're circling here as a guaranteed victory, right? And that's the toughest thing about this league is nothing is going to be guaranteed. And for the Rams, a lot of high-powered offenses. Seattle last year really gave them a lot of problems. Dallas is going to be tough for anybody. The 49ers are going to be healthy again. So going on the road there, kind of like you talked about just a minute ago with the imbalance is something of note. So the Rams, a tough slate there to cap off the end of the season. In this division, it's going to be up for grabs, and the wild card, especially in the NFC, is not going to be easy to get. So the Rams are definitely going to have it a really tough time getting to the playoffs. New England Patriots begin the year weeks 1 through 4, 3 road games against teams that beat them last year. And then you host Pittsburgh, which is going to be tough. I think it's going to be a game they win, but certainly not easy by any means. Opening night, Nick, at Seattle. Seattle's going to beat the brakes off of them, quite frankly. Jacksonville, going to beat the hell out of them. In Buffalo, Josh Allen seems to have this team's number as well. Are the Patriots staring down the barrel of a 1-3 start, Nick?
I think the Patriots are staring down the barrel of a 1-3 start. You have four division winners in that slate there, including three division winners on the road. And I don't think Pittsburgh will necessarily be a tough game. I think the Patriots will win that contest after a weird 11 days off between their opening game and their second game of the season, which has certainly got to play into this as well. But I think the Patriots are staring down the barrel of 1-3. This is a team that I think is primed for regression. And we might do an episode about them in the offseason, talking about how I think they are the biggest candidate for regression in terms of the teams from last season, because they just have a lot of mitigating factors against them. They obviously have some of the off the field issues with Mike Vrabel and Diana Rossini, which is always going to circle around. And I think that was a team that had a lot of very fortunate bounces last year, a lot of fortunate stretches that will be tough to replicate. And getting this type of start early on is only going to make things more difficult. That Seattle game, I think Seattle is a clear runaway winner in that one in the Super Bowl matchup. I get that they wanted to bring back the matchup from the Super Bowl. They haven't done that the last couple of years in week one, so they're trying to get that juice again on that week one game. So I understand that, but Seattle, I think, is just a significant better team on paper across the board. Buffalo's got their number. Buffalo owns them. And in that new stadium, where they're going to be fired up all season long, it's going to be impossible to play at the Bills this year. And then Jacksonville, that's a team that I think is still going to be in a very good spot. And I like what they project to do. So I think 1-3 is very much on the table for the Patriots through the first 4 weeks. And the Rams, they have a very tough end of the season. I think, they kind of wanted to play Seattle late in the season. They played Seattle late in the season last year for one of their contests. They played San Fran late in the season last year. They like loading up those division games late in the cycle to kind of get themselves in position, jockeying for spots. But Dallas will be tough. Tampa Bay will be tough. Kansas City, Green Bay, these will all be tough games that are out of division. And that's just a really brutal stretch. And that will sort of make or break the Rams. But it could also put them in a position where maybe they end up falling down. They got to go in a tougher spot in the playoffs. And that may make things difficult if they got to go on the road 3 games in a row. If they have to play themselves into some cold weather climates where Matt Stafford, has had some issues in the past. Not his fault necessarily, but the team as a whole isn't used to maybe playing at Lambeau or at Chicago. I know they beat the Bears last year, but that was a tough sledding experience for them. So that's a very interesting slate there. A tough 6 weeks for the Rams and a tough opening 4 weeks for the Patriots.
They're going to move to two other teams here that have pretty tough stretches. The Bears and the Bills towards the end of the year do not have it easy. And as a fan of these teams, Nick, you just got to sit here and you're shaking. It's mid-May and you're thinking, man, our season's going to come down likely to how we do in these games. We could go 4-0, we could split them, we could go 0-4. And these two teams do play each other on the 19th of December. For the Bears, though, Nick, you have 3 straight games to end the year against fellow NFC North opponents. The Packers last year were a tough out, regardless of where they played them. They did beat them in the playoffs, though. But I mean, for the most part, they should have lost every single game convincingly to the Packers. The Lions, always going to be tough. I know they're going to be a lot better this year. It's a team that likes to gamble, especially if they can ruin your season. They'll go out in there and do it, even if they're not in contention themselves. Then you have to play at Minnesota. Thankfully, it's in a dome, right? So you avoid the weather factor, but that's going to be a tough defense. The offense is going to be revamped this upcoming season. The Bears, that's the toughest stretch you could have asked for, Nick, with those divisional opponents towards the end of the year, because all 4 of you guys are going to be battling for that top spot. And then over at the Bills, at New England, at Green Bay, at Denver, not exactly ideal, especially for a team who I think is just not very talented on defense. And I don't think they're going to be all that much better this upcoming year. And Josh Allen can only wear the cape for so long, Nick, before it starts to get trimmed a little bit and he's not able to make the plays that you see customarily, especially if he has some turnover problems and they have a new regime and whatnot. So I think for the Bills, this is a team that's definitely trending backwards. What do you make of these two?
Yeah, this is very tough as well. I think the Bears and the Bills are two teams that are primed for regression this year. Like I said about the Patriots, the Bears, they played with fire all year. And if you play with fire so long, eventually it's going to burn you. And I think at some point the Bears, the gambling will play a big problem for them, and where they're making turnovers, making bad decisions, really playing themselves into shootouts, having slow starts, things of that nature. The NFC North might be the most balanced division in football, where all four teams, I think, have a case to win the division. I think Minnesota will be great this year with Kyler Murray. I think they were sort of more of a one-off last year. Detroit, I think they will get back to punching at the level that we expect out of them. And Green Bay is still going to be a tough out. So those are four really strong teams. And you play all three of those teams in your division in the last 3 games of the season. That's brutal for sure. Buffalo, again, this is a team that's it's gonna be tough to play in Orchard Park at all this year because that team will be fired up. And then as for the Bills, I think they'll do enough this year to make the playoffs and potentially win the AFC East. I think you get your four free wins with the Dolphins and Jets, free on paper. And then I think the Bills and Patriots will split the series between the two of them, with each team winning one of the contests. But that's still, you got to find a way to get the rest of the wins to get to the playoffs here. And I think the Bills will have enough to get it done when it's all said and done. But this is a tough stretch at the end of the season, especially for a team that's going to be fighting for playoff contention. That Kansas City game, obviously, mouthwatering the Bears. That's a very tough game as well. And then you got to make trips to Lambeau and Denver, two tough environments to play, plus the Patriots game where they're trying to potentially get a split with them or sweep that series at that point in December. Very tough stretches here. The Bills, they are in a very interesting spot, a team to certainly keep an eye on. And I think all four of these teams that we highlighted here in these tough stretches are very interesting teams to keep an eye on, because these may sink or float their seasons. Very intriguing stretches for all four.
Now, to cap things off of our favorite games, we both picked a couple of contests we're interested in seeing this upcoming year. Cowboys Packers. I had like $300 on Dallas money line last year in this matchup, Nick. You know how it ended in a tie. They should have won the game, and it ended in a tie. So I got the push. But I think Micah Parsons, will he be back? I'm not sure. Nonetheless, I think this is kind of an underrated rivalry between two really good teams, because the Packers just run it up on this defense, and I think the Cowboys is going to be a great opportunity early on the season to really go out and make a statement on the road. Sunday night football game, of course. Week 8, Bears Seahawks on a Monday night. I wonder what this would have been like for the NFC Championship game if the Bears didn't make those mistakes there late in the contest. They should have won the game, Nick, against the Rams. And they had some miscommunication that costed them, and I definitely want to see how this game would go. So we're gonna go ahead and run it this year, and we'll find out on the road in Seattle. Week 3, Patriots Jaguars. As a Jags fan, Nick, I'm looking forward to this because I firmly believe we would have beat the hell out of the Patriots last year if we ourselves could have made a couple of more plays to beat Buffalo in that wild card contest. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity to earn some respect, because that's all people were talking about was the Patriots, right? This offseason, that's all they're talking about, right? So I think the Jags, great opportunity for respect themselves. And then another Packers game as they go on the road week 1 to the Vikings. And the reason why this one intrigues me so much is because I think this team can be unreal. Brian Flores' defense, of course, is always going to be tough. Last year, they had giant limitations with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. Justin Jefferson just was not able to get involved because the quarterback was such a weakness for him. Jordan Addison as well. They're going to be joined by Jawan Jennings, giving them a lethal trio. And Kyler Murray now working with Kevin O'Connell is a great opportunity for him to revive his career, where he's had some injuries, he's had some ups and downs as well. And Nick, they can easily prove that they are going to be a top contender in the NFL this year. So the Vikings in week 1, right off the bat, they're going to stun people, I think. And that's why I'm looking forward to them. That's a team that can definitely, improve their Super Bowl odds significantly early on in the season. What do you make of those?
Yeah, I think those are very interesting. The Vikings, obviously, with a quarterback now in Kyler Murray, I think O'Connell's a phenomenal head coach and Flores is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. That's a team that people should really invest in and keep a close eye on. I think this is a team that can really make noise in a very balanced division. The Packers and the Packers and the Cowboys, those are some of the two most popular teams in the nation. They have a very national fan base. A lot of Packers fans across the country, a lot of Cowboys fans across the country. So a national matchup on Sunday Night Football, that was a great matchup last year. That's a really good get for NBC. I know I said NBC has a bit of a weaker slate this year in terms of Sunday Night Football, but that was a pretty good get from them. I like what they did there. Bears Seahawks will be very interesting. I think the Seahawks will win that game, but that's a potential game where the Bears can make some noise and make something happen. The Jaguars are obviously a team that you and I are both pretty high on, as you're a Jaguars fan, and I'm looking on the outside saying this is a team that's got a good defense and a great quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, as well as some good offensive pieces. The Patriots, a very intriguing team to see what they look like regression wise. So I think this is a pretty strong slate of 4 games that you pick to kind of start us off here.
Now looking at your 4 selections, Chiefs, Rams. Every time somebody sees this on a primetime game, they think of that contest back in 2016, where there was like 100 points. And that's a great opportunity though for more offense than this one, right? Thursday night there'll be a great contest. Week 2, Nick is looking forward to Highmark Stadium's debut, hosting the Detroit Lions. The energy is going to be unpalatable in there. Once again, going back to the Rams, the battle for LA does not happen that often, but it's going to go down in week 8. Definitely a game of note. And then week 16, Nick is a Giants fan. He had to pick one of his favorites on the road late in the year against the Lions on a Monday night. Bit of an odd selection because it's possible the Giants are, still battling for a top 5 selection, but they could also maybe be on the outside looking in for a potential playoff spot as well. So some good selections here from Nick. I think we have some nice games we're looking forward to.
Yeah, I really like what the Thursday Night Football product has become the last couple of years. I think Amazon's done a phenomenal job. I think the NFL's kind of been rewarding them with better matchups on Thursday night. In previous years, some of the, certainly when the Thursday Night Football product was introduced, some of the games were brutal. It was horrible matchups between teams that were just garbage, slugging it out for, the right to pick first overall. Just horrible matchups, like bad games on a Thursday night between like Indianapolis and Tennessee, where both teams are just horrible and not doing anything, or between like the Raiders and the Broncos and a matchup that really didn't mean anything. I feel like this year's Thursday slate's got some better matchups, and that primetime Chiefs Rams game will be really interesting. We always talk about that one from 2018 where they had over 100 points. That battle was incredible at the Coliseum back then. One of the best games ever for the regular season. Probably my favorite NFL regular season game ever. Might be some fireworks in this one as well. Both offenses should be pretty good. As a native New Yorker, a lot of pride in the new Bills Stadium. I think it's a really cool stadium, even though I'm not a Bills fan. I'm excited to see what that looks like. And I think opening it up on Thursday night on national television on Prime, the first game of the season for Prime, will be really cool and a good way to see that. And again, the Lions, I think, are prime for a bounce back. No pun intended there. So that could be a really fun matchup there. The Lions may play spoiler on the opening night party. The Battle of LA is pretty rare and fun to watch. I think those are both good teams. McDaniel, the offensive coordinator for the Chargers now, so that offense should be really interesting with Herbert and company. I like what they did last year with the tight ends in the second half of the season, and that team really played some good football late in the season. So that will be a pretty good slot there at the 4 o'clock, 4:25 window there for that game. Should be really solid if that's a national televised game. And then I went with the Giants going to the Lions. A unique matchup. They don't play the Lions a ton. They don't play in Detroit a ton. I know they played last year in Detroit, but in general, they still don't play a ton in Detroit. So getting that on national television on Monday night is a pretty intriguing matchup. Again, that kind of falls in that no man's holiday land period where it's like, I think, December 28th. So it's kind of right in the middle of Christmas and New Year's. So that'll be a time where people are just kind of relax and hang out with the family. I know I'll certainly watch that with my dad and watch that with my family, and that'll be a really fun matchup. The Giants, maybe they'll be playing for something. Probably not, but they may be playing spoiler. They could potentially knock the Lions out of, hosting a playoff game or something of that nature. So there may be some extra levels to that game. Hopefully the offense for the Giants is firing on all cylinders and that defense still looks good. But I like a lot of these games on Thursday night. I like a lot of these Monday night games as well. I think the primetime slate this year is really good as the NFL continues to try and emphasize those windows as opportunities to grow the game and get a bigger national television audience on Amazon and on ESPN.
For today's episode, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.